Just initial where they marked. That was my mom, in a room with bottled water and a row of cheap pens laid out like silverware, at what she had told me was lunch. I'm Iris Walsh. I was 33 that spring, and I had worked at a county courthouse long enough to know what a room looks like when it has already decided something. My sister was already seated. She had a purse in her lap, and she didn't look up when I came in. There was a stack of paper on the table about 3 fingers thick, and a woman in a gray blazer with a legal pad, and a phone in the middle of the table with a light on it. My mother slid the stack toward me the way you'd pass a bread basket. I read the first page before I picked up a pen. My name was on line 4. My employer. The last 4 digits of my social security number. A signature that looked like mine and was not. What I did in the next 10 minutes cost my niece her bedroom, and I would do it again. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones, the people who kept the peace for years, and the day they finally stopped paying for it. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. 5 months before that room, I was standing behind window 4 in the Civil Division of the Ardsley County Courthouse, in Haw Ridge, North Carolina, watching a line form outside the glass doors at 10 minutes to 8. That line is the same every morning. A man with a folder held against his chest, a woman with a toddler on her hip, and a summons folded into eighths. Somebody's son in work boots, who has been putting this off since March. My job is to take what they hand me, tell them what it is actually called, and stamp the date on it. The form says, "Complaint for money owed." The man says, "My brother-in-law took my truck." Both things are true, and only one of them fits in the box. That morning, I gave a woman a fee waiver petition and showed her where to sign, and she asked me if this was going to make trouble, and I said what I always say. Everything in that building gets fixed the same way. Somebody says it out loud, and somebody writes it down. She laughed like I'd told a joke. I meant it. I had been meaning it for 9 years, 40 hours a week, to strangers. There is a whole shelf behind me back there of things people are entitled to and never ask for, and my entire job is to hand them across a counter to whoever finally works up the nerve to come stand in the line. I had never once said it to anybody with my last name. At 9:14 my phone buzzed face down next to the stamp pad. Mom. My mother does not call on a Tuesday morning. My mother calls on Sunday at 4 to tell me what time dinner is, which I already know, because dinner has been at 6 since I was old enough to hold a fork. The house on Tull Road hasn't changed since 1996 except for the appliances. 6 o'clock, pot roast, everybody in their assigned chair. There is a rule in that house that nobody has ever said out loud, and it goes like this. Anything unpleasant gets handled before it reaches the table. You do not bring a problem to dinner. You bring the solved version of it, or you bring nothing. That night my sister Marla brought news. She'd been pre-approved. She and Bess had found a house on Sedge Road, 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard, a kitchen with a window over the sink. My mother said, "We found it," and then went right on to the part about the yard, and I let it go by, because it was a small thing to snag on, and because Marla was lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before the divorce. Bess, who was 9 and had opinions, asked whether the fence was tall enough for a dog. My dad said the wiring in a house that age would need looking at, which is what he says about every house, because he spent 31 years as an electrician and cannot help it. I said congratulations, and I meant it. Then my mother asked how the car refinance was going, and I said fine. I'd thawed my credit to do it. It was open until the 5th. She asked what thawed meant. I explained it the way I explain things at window 4. The bureaus call it a security freeze. Everybody else calls it locking the door. She nodded and passed me the potatoes and asked which lender I'd used, and I told her. And she said that was smart. And I felt the small warm thing you feel when your mother says you're smart. There is a version of me that would have heard that question. That version didn't survive the year I turned 15. When I was 15, I had $640 in a savings account at the credit union on 4th Street, from 2 summers of folding towels at a motel, and the account had my mother's name on it too, because that's how a miner's account works. My Uncle Denny's tire shop went underwater in October. In November, the account had $11 in it. I found out at the ATM, in the rain, with my friend Kelsey waiting in the car. When I got home, my mother was making a grocery list. She said Denny would put it back after the first of the year, and she said one more thing, and I have carried it around ever since like a stone in a coat pocket. She said, "Don't make Christmas about money." So I didn't. I set the table. I sang in the church program. Denny came and ate and told a story about a customer, and everybody laughed, and I laughed too, and nobody in that house ever mentioned $640 again, including me. In February, I asked my mother once, in the car, whether Denny had said anything about it, and she turned the radio up a notch and said, "We didn't need to keep bringing that up," and I never brought it up again. It never came back. I want to be clear about something because it matters later. I was not confused about what happened. I knew exactly what happened. I had simply been taught, in the most effective way a person can be taught anything, that making a scene costs more than being robbed. On the form, that's called a joint account with a custodial parent. At my house, it was called being the one who could handle it. In the middle of March, my mother asked me for my W-2 and my last 2 pay stubs. She said she was building a family budget spreadsheet to see what everybody could put toward Marla's down payment, and she said it in the tone she uses for church potluck assignments. I said no. I want that on the record too, since I've spent a lot of time since then wondering if I could have done anything differently. I said I'd write her an income letter instead. 1 page, my gross and my net, and my hire date. Signed, and she could put whatever number she wanted in her spreadsheet. Then I asked her the direct question, because I do know how to ask one. I said, "Is anybody putting my name on anything?" There was a half-second of nothing on the line. Then she laughed and said, "Iris, of course not." And here is the thing I still can't fully explain to people who ask why I let it go. When your mother sounds offended, you apologize. That is not a decision. It's older than deciding. So I apologized. 2 weeks later, on the last Saturday in March, she came to my apartment on Bragg Street to watch Bess while I ran a load down to the laundry room on the ground floor, because my dryer had died and the warranty was in the accordion file in the 3rd kitchen drawer, along with my tax returns, my pay stubs, my lease, and my car title. I was gone 35 minutes. When I came back up, Bess was asleep on the couch, and my mother was putting her coat on. And the 3rd kitchen drawer was closed, the way a drawer is closed when something inside it has shifted. The alert came in at 6:40 in the morning on April 4th, while I was standing in my kitchen waiting on the coffee. New hard inquiry. Halbrook Financial. I had never heard of Halbrook Financial in my life. The inquiry was dated April 3rd. My freeze had come off on March 28th to let the credit union pull for the car, and it was set to go back on at midnight on the 5th. 9 days open, and somebody had walked through on day 7. I called Halbrook at 9. A pleasant man asked me for a loan number and I said I didn't have one. That was the entire problem. And he explained, also pleasantly, that he couldn't discuss any file with someone he couldn't confirm was a party to it. I said I was calling to tell him I wasn't a party to it. He said he understood and he was sorry, and there was nothing in his system he could look up from a name. Then I called my mother. I want you to hear how good she was at this. She didn't hesitate. She didn't get defensive. She sounded slightly bored. She said, "That's the prequel, honey. That's just how they shop rates. Marla's broker probably ran the whole household." I said I wasn't in Marla's household. She said, "You're in mine." And then she asked whether I wanted the good ham or the honey ham for Easter, and I answered her, because that is what the muscle does. I hung up and stood there with cold coffee and told myself a story about how brokers work, and the story was almost good enough. I did everything right. I want that written down somewhere, because for about 6 weeks I believed doing everything right was the same as being protected. I put a fraud alert on all 3 bureaus that afternoon. I sent written disputes, certified, return receipt, with the inquiry date and a statement that I had not applied for credit with Halbrook Financial. I called the general line at every lender whose name I could shake out of the credit report. I left a voicemail for the broker at Halbrook with the date and the time and my callback number, spoken slowly, The way you leave a message you expect somebody to play back later. Here is what I learned. A dispute takes 30 days, and at the end of 30 days the Bureau will tell you what the furnisher told them, and none of that stops a loan that is already moving. A hard inquiry is a footprint, not a door. And without a loan number, you are not a party to anything, which means the only people who can tell you what's happening are the people doing it to you. So I called my mother and asked her for the loan number. She said, in a voice like a hand on a doorknob, "Marla's finances are Marla's business." I said it might be my business. She said, "Then ask Marla." I asked Marla. Marla said she'd have to check with Mom. I sat in my car in the employee lot at the courthouse and did the math on what I had just been told. To defend myself, I needed permission from the person I needed defending from. On the 27th of April, my sister asked me to come see the house. I said yes, because you say yes. 4411. Sedge Road sat at the end of a street where every mailbox had a different kind of dent. The listing agent had left the lockbox code with Marla, which is how I knew the deal was far along. Marla walked into the kitchen, saw the window over the sink, and cried standing up, with her hands at her sides, which is how she has cried since she was 6. Bess ran the whole house twice, and then claimed the corner bedroom, and she pulled a roll of blue painter's tape out of her mother's tote bag, tore off a strip, and stuck it to the door at exactly her own eye level. She had written Bess on it in marker, slanted uphill, with the S backward. She stood there and admired it. I stood in the hallway and understood something with my whole body that I had been keeping at arm's length for 3 weeks. Whatever was wrong with this loan, fixing it was going to come out of that room. My mother came up behind me and put her hand flat between my shoulder blades, warm, the way she does. She looked at the tape and she said, "Nobody has to make this a whole thing." I didn't answer her. I drove the 20 minutes back to Haw Ridge with the windows down and the radio off, and when I got to my apartment I didn't take my coat off. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The identity theft report has a field partway down the second page where you name the person you believe did it. Everything above that field I could fill out in my sleep. Dates, account types, whether I had contacted the creditor, whether I wanted a copy forwarded to law enforcement. I have handed that form's cousin across a counter 100 times. I know what it does, and I know what it's for, and I know that it is not an accusation. It is an affidavit, which is a different animal entirely. I put my cursor in the field and I typed DENISE. Then I sat there and looked at my mother's name in a box on a government form on my kitchen table, and I could hear her voice saying, "Don't make Christmas about money." And I could hear a 9-year-old telling me the fence had to be tall enough for a dog. I deleted it one letter at a time. Then I closed the laptop and I made a deal with myself. The same deal I have made my entire life, and the terms of it were, 1 more week. 1 more week and Marla closes, and then I'll call the servicer and get my name off the back end, where nobody has to be embarrassed. Quiet. Clean. Nobody standing up in a room. I even wrote myself a little plan on the back of a grocery receipt, with steps and phone numbers, because writing a plan feels almost exactly like doing something and costs nothing at all. I have thought about that week a great deal since. On the form, it's called a delay in reporting. What it actually was me signing something. I just didn't use a pen. My father was in the garage on Tull Road rewinding a spool of 12-gauge wire he'd taken off a job in 2009 and never used. He is a careful man. He labels things. He has a coffee can of screws sorted by length. I stood in the doorway and said, "Daddy, is my name on Marla's loan?" He didn't stop winding. That was the answer, and I got it before he said a word. Then he said, "Your mother's handling it." I said that wasn't what I asked. He said, "She's got it worked out. It's a co-borrower thing. It comes off." He said it the way you'd explain that a breaker trips sometimes. I asked him how long he'd known. He went quiet for a second, and the wire kept going around the spool, and he said, "A while." Then he said, "Iris." Just my name, which in that family is a complete sentence and means, "Don't." I stood there long enough that he finally looked up, and I want to be fair to him, because he isn't cruel and he never was. He looked genuinely sorry. the way a man looks sorry about weather. Then he picked up a roll of electrical tape off the bench and held it out to me and said, "Here, you needed this for that lamp." I took it. I drove back to Bragg Street with a roll of electrical tape in the cup holder and did the arithmetic on my allies, which took about 4 seconds, because there weren't any. That was the first thing this cost me, and it wasn't even the loan. 2 days later, a woman came to window 4 to file a domestic violence protective order. She was maybe 50, in scrubs, and she had the paperwork half filled out already, which is rare. Behind her in the lobby, another woman who had her exact same jaw stood with her arms crossed. Her sister, it turned out. And while I was getting the packet together, I could hear it. The way you hear a television through a wall. "You're going to blow this family apart. He's got a job. Think about Mama. You're making this a whole thing." That last one wasn't the phrase she used. It was close enough that my hand stopped on the counter. The woman in scrubs came back to my window and said quietly that she'd changed her mind. She'd come back another time. And I did the only thing I am allowed to do, which is that I gave her the packet anyway. I told her the clerk's office is open at 8, and there's no filing fee for these, and she doesn't have to call ahead. I told her the magistrate's office around the side of the building takes the emergency ones all night, weekends included. She folded it into her purse under her wallet where you put something you don't want to see. She thanked me twice. She did not come back that week, and I don't know if she ever did. I went home that night and sat on my couch with my coat still on and thought about the fact that I had a packet of my own sitting on a laptop, and that I had not once, in 18 years, walked myself up to my own counter. Marla called me on the 6th of May, warm as bathwater, and said Mom wanted to do lunch. Friday the 16th, in Greensboro, her treat, just us. She said it like a peace offering, and part of me went straight for it, because we had been circling each other since Sedge Road and I hated it. I asked where. She said Mom made the reservation. I asked where again, because I was going to have to leave work, and I like to know how long the drive is. She said, "I don't know. Someplace off Battleground. Mom'll text you the address." Then she said the part that snagged. "Take the afternoon. Don't just take a lunch hour." Mom said take the whole afternoon. I have worked at that courthouse for 9 years. I have taken a half day for a root canal and a half day for my grandmother's funeral. Nobody in my family has ever, in my adult life, told me to burn PTO for a meal. I said sure. I put it on the calendar in the break room in pencil. Then I went back to window 4 and stamped a date on a landlord's complaint and thought about the fact that my mother had picked a restaurant she wouldn't name, on a workday, an hour from home, and asked for my whole afternoon. If you've ever gotten an invitation that felt 1 degree off, wrong day, wrong time, no name on the restaurant, pay attention to that degree. I didn't. Not fast enough. Tell me in the comments where you first noticed yours. And subscribe. Because this gets worse before it gets right. The dryer finally died for good on the 8th of May, and I went into the third kitchen drawer for the warranty. I keep an accordion file in there. It is the one part of my life that is organized the way the courthouse is organized, because that is the only organizing system I have ever trusted. Tabs, chronological, nothing folded. I do not fold documents. I clip them. My grandmother folded everything into quarters, and I spent my childhood flattening receipts on the kitchen counter with the side of my hand, and somewhere in there I decided folding was a form of disrespect toward paper. So when I pulled the tab-marked appliances and the February pay stub came out with it, creased into 4, I stood very still. I went through the whole file. 3 more had the same fold. My February stub, my January stub, and the W-2. All quartered, all put back in the wrong order, the W-2 in front of the stubs instead of behind them. It was the 8th of May. The inquiry was April 3rd. My mother had watched Bess on the last Saturday in March while I was in the basement laundry room for 35 minutes. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, and I did not cry, and I did not call anybody. I got a pen and an envelope out of the junk drawer and I started writing dates on the back of it, in a column, the way I would build a chronology for a file that somebody else brought me. March 15th, the last Saturday in March, April 3rd, April 4th. When I got to the bottom of the column, I had run out of ways to call it a misunderstanding. The next morning, I took my 15-minute break and rode the elevator 2 floors down. The Register of Deeds is in the same building I work in, which sounds convenient and is actually a little humiliating because it means the answer had been 90 feet below me the entire time. Different counter, different people, same fluorescent hum. I pulled the parcel history on 4411 Sedge Road. It is public. Anybody can do it. A woman in a windbreaker was doing it 2 terminals over, looking up her own driveway easement. I found the current owners and the deed of trust from when they bought in 2011, and printed on the bottom of that instrument, the way it always is, was the name of the firm that had handled their closing. Cardinal Title and Closing, Greensboro, Battleground Avenue. There was no reason on earth that the same firm would handle this sale, except that sellers use who they used, and small towns run on ruts, and I have watched enough paper come across a counter to know that a rut is the closest thing to a prediction you get in this line of work. I did not have a printer card with me. I took the parking stub out of my coat pocket, the little one from the employee deck with the date on it, and I wrote Cardinal Title, Battleground on the back of it in ballpoint, and I put it back in my coat pocket. Then I went upstairs and took the counter again, and a man asked me how to serve his stepson, and I told him what it's called and what it actually is. I had gone down 2 floors to find something my mother could have just told me. That's the part I keep coming back to. I called Cardinal Title on the 12th from the employee lot on my lunch, with the car running for the air conditioning. A young woman answered. I said I was calling about the Sedge Road transaction in Haw Ridge, and I wanted to confirm the schedule. I did not lie. I did not say I was the buyer. I said I was calling about the file, which was, God help me, accurate. She asked if I was with the lender. I said no. She asked for a file number. I said I had the property address, and I gave it. And she typed for 11 or 12 seconds. I could hear a printer somewhere behind her. And then she said the sentence, in the bright, helpful voice of somebody reading a calendar entry, that took the floor out from under my car. All parties should plan to be here Friday at 11. Friday, the 16th, 11 o'clock. My mother's lunch, an hour from home, on a workday, whole afternoon. I said thank you very much, and asked, just to be sure, whether that was the Sedge Road file. She said, yes ma'am, 11 o'clock, Suite C. I said thank you again, and she said, have a good one. And I hung up and sat there with both hands on the wheel in a parking lot in Haw Ridge, North Carolina, while the vents blew cold air at my face. It wasn't lunch. It had never been lunch. There is a specific kind of quiet that arrives when a thing you have been calling a suspicion turns into a schedule. It is not loud at all. It is the quietest thing that has ever happened to me. That night, I found the lender behind Halbrook. Brokers place loans. Somebody funds them. It took 2 hours and a lot of reading, and the name that kept surfacing was Piedmont Union Lending. I called their fraud line at 8:15 the next morning and got a man named Kearns who was, I have to say, extremely decent about the whole thing. I told him I believed my identity had been used as a co-borrower on a mortgage set to close Friday. He asked for the loan number. I said I didn't have it. He asked for the borrower's name and I gave him my sister's, and he said he could not confirm or deny the existence of a file. I said I understood, and asked what he could do. What he told me, I have repeated to about 9 people since. He said the fraud desk can flag a file, but they can't act on an inbound call from somebody they haven't identified. He said identity verification on a mortgage happens at one place and one time, which is at origination, at the closing table, with government photo ID, in front of the closing attorney. He said, I'm sorry, ma'am. If you're a party to the transaction, you're entitled to be present. Entitled to be present. He said it as an apology. I wrote it on the back of the envelope with the dates on it. Then I sat on the edge of my bed for a while and understood that every road out of this ran through one room at 11 o'clock on Friday, with my mother sitting next to me. So I was going to lunch. She called Thursday at 9 to confirm. She was in a wonderful mood. She talked about the weather in Greensboro and whether I should bring a jacket for the air conditioning, and she asked if my car was making that noise again, and then she said, "Wear something nice? You always look nice in that gray shirt." I said, "Okay." And then there was one of those pauses that opens up on a phone call late at night when neither person wants to hang up, and my mother said something she has never said in my hearing before or since. She said, "You know, when I was 19, my mother put a pen in my hand in that front room on Delwood and she stopped. She just stopped. The way a car stops when you take your foot off the gas on a flat road, coasting into nothing. 2 seconds. 3. Then she said, "Anyway, it's supposed to rain Saturday, so tell Marla to bring the umbrella out of my trunk." I said I would. She said good night, sugar, and hung up first, which she always does. I lay in bed afterward and I thought about a 19-year-old girl in a front room on Delwood Street with a pen in her hand and somebody standing over her, and I felt sorry for her in a way that went straight down to the bottom of me, and I understood, lying there in the dark, that feeling sorry for her was not going to change one single thing about 11 o'clock Friday. Both of those were true at the same time. They still are. Friday morning I got up at 5:30 and ironed the gray shirt, which I want to note, because I have been asked about it. I wore what she told me to wear. I put things in a folder. The certified mail receipts, the printout of the April 4th alert, the copies of the disputes, the envelope with the dates on the back. I put the folder in a canvas bag and put the bag on the passenger seat. I checked my coat pocket and the old parking stub was still in there with Cardinal title written on it in ballpoint, soft at the corners now. The drive from Haw Ridge to Greensboro is 55 minutes on a good day, and I left at 9:45 because I did not want to be late, and I did not want to be early either. I did not have a plan. I want to be honest about that, because people assume I went in there with a strategy. And I didn't. Everything I know about strategy I learned from watching people at a counter, and what I have learned is that people who go in with a plan get taken apart, and people who go in with one question sometimes don't. I had one question. I had been turning it over since Kern said entitled to be present, and by the time I hit the county line I could say it in my sleep in the flat voice I use behind the glass. The whole drive I kept my hands at 10 and 2 like a teenager. I have never been that calm about anything in my life, and it scared me more than being scared would have. The address my mother texted me at 10 past 10 was an office park. 1 story, brick, a strip of boxwoods, 4 suites, a dentist on the end. Not a restaurant. There is no version of that address that is a restaurant, and she sent it anyway. 25 minutes into the drive when I was already committed to the road, because by then it didn't matter. I parked, took a fresh stub from the visitor kiosk, and put it in my coat pocket next to the old one. Suite C said Cardinal title and closing in vinyl letters. Inside it smelled like carpet glue and coffee. A young woman named Talia walked me back to a conference room with a long table and a window onto the parking lot. I counted the room the way I count a courtroom before a hearing, because that's the habit. 13 pens, uncapped, laid in a row. Bottled waters, sweating. A wall clock 2 minutes slow. A speakerphone in the middle of the table with a green light on it. A woman in a gray blazer at the head, mid-40s, legal pad, reading glasses pushed up. Corinne Odom, the closing attorney, because this is North Carolina, and a closing here happens with a lawyer in the room, whether anybody likes it or not. A real estate agent named Gwen with a phone in her hand. My sister, already seated, purse in her lap. And my mother, who stood up when I came in and put her arms out like she was welcoming me to her own house. Out in the hallway, on a bench by the water cooler, Bess sat with a tablet and headphones, swinging her feet. "There she is," my mother said. "Sit down, honey, they're on a schedule." I sat. Talia said something about needing IDs at the end. Gwen said the sellers were flexible on the walkthrough. Somebody laughed. It was, for about 90 seconds, an extremely ordinary room. Then my mother reached across, took the top third of the stack, squared it against the table twice. She squares paper. She has always squared paper. And slid it toward me. "Just initial where they marked," she said. There were little pink arrow flags down the right edge, maybe 15 of them. I picked up the first page. The header said, Uniform Residential Loan Application. Section 1A, Borrower Information, was my sister. Line 4, under Additional Borrower, was me, Iris L. Walsh. Employer, Ardsley County. 9 years. Gross monthly income, correct to the dollar, which is the detail that made my ears ring, because that number came off a stub that had been folded into quarters. Date of application, April 3rd. Relationship to primary borrower, sibling. The box asking whether I intended to occupy the property was checked no. Somebody had gone through and filled in every field about my life, with the kind of accuracy that only comes from having the actual documents in front of you. And in the signature block at the bottom of the page, above my typed name, a signature. It had my slant. It had my ugly little R. And the W was wrong. I looped the W counterclockwise, which a third-grade teacher named Mrs. Petrie tried and failed to break me of, and this W looped the other way. That was it. That was the whole tell. One loop, in blue ink, on a document I had never seen in my life. I did not put the page down. Here is what I need you to understand about a room like that, because it is the whole reason this worked for as long as it did. Nobody threatens you. Everybody is kind. Gwen mentioned, to the room in general, that the rate lock expired Monday. Talia mentioned that the sellers had movers booked Tuesday. Ms. Odom uncapped her own pen and set it down parallel to her legal pad, the way you do when you're ready. My sister looked at me across the table with an expression I had not seen since we were children, and I had the last of something she wanted. And it was not greed. It was pleading. And that was worse. Bess's feet were visible under the hallway door, swinging. The clock on the wall was 2 minutes slow, and under the table my mother put her hand around my wrist and squeezed once. Not hard at all. Exactly the pressure of 20 years. Nobody in that room did a single thing you could describe to a police officer. The room did it, the clock did it, and the movers did it, and the pink flags did it, and the fact that every adult present was being so reasonable did it. That's the trick. You don't have to lean on somebody who has been trained since 15 to be the one who can handle it. You just have to build a room where objecting would be rude, and then hand her a pen. If you have ever sat in a room like that, a closing, a hospital hallway, a lawyer's office at 4 in the afternoon, comment, I know that room, and I'll read everyone. Subscribe if you want to see what I did next. I said, can I have a minute? Not a question. Ms. Odom said, of course, take your time, and I stood up and walked out into the hall, and my mother was behind me before the door swung shut. We went 12 feet past Bess, who did not look up because she had headphones on and was 9. My mother stood close, the way she does, and she used her warm voice. She said, I know how this looks. She said Marla had been turned down twice on her own, and the payment was less than the rent, and that a co-borrower is a formality. A piece of paper. That's all it is. She said, you'll be off it in a year. We refinance next spring and your name comes off and nobody ever has to know. I said, you put my income on a federal document. She said, I put our income on it. That's what a family is. I said, somebody signed my name. And my mother did not deny it. That is the part I want to be precise about. She did not say she hadn't. She looked at me with real hurt. Genuine, not performed, and she said, nobody has to make this a whole thing. And then, because I had not moved, she added the rest of it, quietly, glancing down the hall toward the bench. You do this in there, you're doing it to your niece. That's the invoice. That's what it looks like when it finally comes in the mail. I turned and walked, and my mother must have thought I was going back to the table because she went in ahead of me. I went the other way, to the restroom, and locked the stall door. I had read the loan number off the top right corner of page 1 without deciding to, the way you read an exit sign. 9 digits and 2 letters. I called the fraud line and got a woman this time, not Kearns, and when she asked for the loan number I gave it to her, and everything changed in about 4 seconds. She could see the file. She confirmed my name and my date of birth, and the last 4, and asked me 2 verification questions I could answer and 1 I couldn't. And then a supervisor came on, and I told him the same sentence I'd told Kearns, except now I was a party to a file. He put a flag on it while I was standing in a bathroom stall in an office park. Then he told me the thing that mattered. He said a flag stops funding, eventually, on their end. But the closing was happening right now, in that building, and the settlement agent and the closing attorney were operating off the file in front of them, and the only way to stop the table was for the borrower whose identity was in question to state it there. He said, "It has to be said in the room, ma'am." He gave me a reference number. I got the parking stub out of my coat pocket. The old one. The one that already said Cardinal Title, Battleground on the back in my handwriting from a week ago, and I wrote the reference number under it. Then I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror for a second, and did not give myself a speech. I walked back down the hall past my niece and I sat down. You could feel the room let go when I sat down. Gwen came back in behind me. Talia's hands went to the keyboard. My sister exhaled through her nose. My mother reached over and straightened the stack again and moved it half an inch closer to me, and the little pink flags stuck out like tongues. I picked up the pen. I want you to know I felt my whole body agree with picking up the pen. 18 years of training is not a thought, it's a current. And the current said, sign it, get in the car, fix it in the fall, let the child have the room. I took the cap off. Then I turned toward the head of the table and I used the voice I used behind the glass at window 4, which is flat and unhurried and has no feeling in it at all, and I said, Ms. Odom, is the co-borrower required to be present at origination and identified? Talia stopped typing. Not slowed. Stopped. Gwen looked up from her phone. Ms. Odom's eyes came off her legal pad and landed on me, and I watched a professional woman go from lunch hour to fully awake in less than a second, and it was like watching a light come on in a house you'd assumed was empty. My sister said, Iris? In a small voice. My mother laughed, a short dry sound, and she was about a half-second late with it, and everybody in that room heard the delay. Ms. Odom set her own pen down on the legal pad, squared it, and said, That's an interesting question. Why do you ask? There was no way back through that door. There hasn't been since. I said, because I'd like to know the answer before I initial anything. Ms. Odom did not look at my mother. She looked at me, and then at the stack. And then she said, to the room, in a voice that had changed temperature entirely. Let's pause. Talia, I need government photo ID from everyone at this table before we go any further, and I'd like the file. Talia was already up. Gwen said, Corinne, the lock. And Ms. Odom said, I understand. In a way that ended it. My mother said brightly, Is there a problem? We're all here. And Ms. Odom said, We'll see. She took page 1 out of my hand. She asked first. She said, May I? And I gave it to her. And she read the signature block. And then she read the date. And then she turned the page and read the next one. And the room got so quiet I could hear the printer in the next office finish a job. She asked Talia for the closing instructions and read something on the second page of those too. Then she looked up at me and asked it plainly, the way you'd ask somebody's date of birth. Ma'am, did you sign the application dated April 3rd? And I said, No. It fell into that room like a dropped glass. Talia's hands came off the keyboard and into her lap. Gwen stood up and walked out into the hall, and I heard her say something to Bess in a bright voice about a vending machine. My sister said my name again, and then stopped, because there wasn't a second half to the sentence, and my mother started to arrange. That is what she does when she's afraid, and I had never once identified it before that morning, standing in a room I'd been driven to under a false name for the meal. She turned her chair toward Ms. Odom and she smiled, and she started explaining. Ms. Odom held up one hand and stopped her, and then she did the kindest thing anybody did to me that day, and it was very nearly the worst. She took her glasses off. She said, Here's where we are. I'm not dispersing today. But nothing has to go in this file right now. I can table the closing. We can all take a week. And the parties can decide how they'd like to proceed. She looked at me when she said the last part. She was giving me a door. Nothing on paper? No affidavit, no fraud referral, no reference number read into a phone. Just a Friday that quietly didn't happen, a drive home, and a family that could still eat dinner together. My mother took it before the sentence finished cooling. "That's fine," she said. "That's perfect. We'll come back Tuesday, we'll get it all straightened out." And I watched every shoulder in that room come down 2 inches. Gwen came back in. Talia reached for her water. My sister put her hand flat on the table and closed her eyes, and I could see her doing the math on Tuesday, on the movers, on the corner bedroom. Out in the hallway, my niece's feet were swinging under the door. I could have had all of it. That's the thing nobody understands about that morning. Safety and peace were both on the table at the same time, for the only time in my life, and all I had to do was say, "Okay." I thought about a savings account at a credit union on 4th Street with $11 in it. I thought about a 19-year-old in a front room on Delwood with a pen in her hand. And I thought about Bess, who is 9, and I did the arithmetic on how old she'd be in 18 years, which is 27, which is old enough to have good credit and a mother who needs a favor. Ms. Odom said, "Ms. Walsh, is that acceptable to you?" And I said, "No, ma'am." I put page 1 down in the middle of the table where everyone could see it, and I turned it so it faced Ms. Odom. I read the loan number out loud off the top corner, all 9 digits and both letters, slowly, the way you read a case number into a record. Then I said 3 things, and I said them in the flat voice, and I did not use the word mother once. I said, "First, I need it stated in the file that I did not sign the application dated April 3rd, and that I did not consent to the use of my income or my social security number on this loan." I said, "Second, Piedmont Union Lending's fraud department has an open reference on this file as of 40 minutes ago." And I put the parking stub on the table next to the page, my own handwriting on the back of it, and slid it toward Talia. "That's the reference number." I said, "Third, I'd like the name of the closer on that phone, please." The green light on the speakerphone had been on the entire time. A man's voice said, "This is Ray Adair, Piedmont Union." "My father's name is Ray. I want to tell you I didn't notice." I noticed. And then my mother, who has managed a freight office and a church kitchen and 40 years of Sunday dinners, who has never in her life been in a room that ran on rules instead of on her, turned to the closing attorney and started to fill the silence, because silence was the only enemy she knew how to fight. She said Iris agreed to this in March. She said Iris has always been dramatic when she's tired. She said, "You have to understand what she's like. She works at a courthouse. Everything's a federal case." She said Marla was turned down twice, and what was she supposed to do? Watch her granddaughter live in a rental? She said the income was family income. She said it was going to come off in a year. She said, "Nobody has to make this a whole thing." She said it in front of a licensed closing attorney with a legal pad and a paralegal whose hands had gone back to the keyboard. And a lender's closer on an open line. Talia was typing. Ms. Odom was writing. Everything in that building gets fixed the same way. Somebody says it out loud and somebody writes it down. It just had never once been me saying it, and it had never once been my family being written down. Mr. Adair said 3 sentences from inside the speaker and the loan died on the table. He said the file was flagged, the funding was suspended, and no disbursement would occur pending review. Ms. Odom said she could not proceed to disbursement in any event, and that she'd be notifying the seller's attorney. Gwen took her phone out into the parking lot, and I could see her through the window with her hand on top of her head. My sister sat there for a long moment, and then she said, without looking at me, "I didn't ask her to do it." And then, because Marla has never in her life been able to leave a true thing half said, "I didn't ask her not to either." That's the most honest sentence anybody in my family has ever said to me. Gwen took Bess to the lobby and bought her a bottle of water out of the machine, and I could hear my niece asking whether we were still getting lunch, and then asking it again, louder, the way children do when the adults have stopped answering. Nobody answered her that time either. My mother did not speak to me again. She gathered her purse and her keys, and she went out to her car and sat in it. My phone rang while I was walking to my own car with a canvas bag and a folder I'd never opened. It was my dad. He had already heard, which meant she'd called him from the parking lot before she'd called anyone else. He didn't yell. He has never yelled. He said, "Iris, what would it have hurt to wait till Tuesday?" I stood between a boxwood hedge and a Honda in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I understood that I had just lost my father. Not in a fight, not with any drama, but in the question he chose to ask first. Ms. Odom caught me at the door and asked me to come back for 10 minutes. She put me in a side office with a fluorescent light and a dead plant, and printed two things: a written statement for the file, and an identity theft affidavit. She did not counsel me. She was careful about that. She said twice that she was not my attorney. She said, "You should have your own counsel for this." Then she put the affidavit down and said the truest thing anyone said to me that year. She said, "I want you to be certain. Once this is in the file, it isn't yours to stop. The lender has obligations. Their fraud unit has obligations. Whatever happens next, it doesn't happen because you decided it does." I asked her to say that again, and she did, more slowly, and she did not look away while she said it. I thought about the field on page 2 of a form on my kitchen table on the 27th of April, and how I'd deleted 6 letters one at a time. I picked up her pen. I filled in the boxes I had filled in for strangers 100 times from the other side of a counter. When I got to the field, I typed nothing because it was paper. I wrote it. Denise Walsh. Mother. And then I signed my own name at this bottom, with the W looping counterclockwise, the way Mrs. Petrie never could fix, and I wrote the date next to it, and my hand did not shake. 20 years I had believed that keeping quiet postponed the bill. It doesn't. It just moves it down to whoever is smallest at the table. It had been me at 15. It was going to be Bess at 27. I put the cap back on the pen and set it down on the desk, squared to the edge and said thank you, and went out to my car. 6 weeks for the record. The loan never funded. The sellers relisted and had it under contract again in 19 days, and Marla lost the $412 she'd paid for the inspection, and nothing else, because her contract had a financing contingency, which is the one piece of luck in this entire story. Piedmont Union's fraud unit did what fraud units do, on their own schedule, without asking me. I never filed a police report. I want to be clear about that, because people assume I sent my mother to jail and I didn't do anything of the kind. There were no handcuffs. There was a letter demanding repayment of origination costs, and a permanent block on her doing business with that lender, and a very short conversation with an investigator in July that I was told about afterward. My credit took 4 months to come clean. I carry an extended fraud alert now that runs 7 years. My aunt called once to tell me I had ruined the family's summer. My father texts on my birthday. Sunday dinner is still at 6 on Tull Road, and everything unpleasant is still handled before it reaches the table, and I am not invited, which is the arrangement. In late June, Marla signed a lease on a 2-bedroom on Klein Street in her own name, with a bank, as the only thing standing behind her instead of a person. I helped her carry the mattress up. On the second afternoon, I went down the hall and found a strip of blue painter's tape stuck to a bedroom door at exactly 9-year-old eye level, Bess, slanting uphill, S backward. My mother left me a voicemail on a Tuesday night in July. I have listened to it more times than I'll admit. There is no apology in it. There is no threat in it either, which surprised people when I told them. She talked for a minute about a dishwasher and a cousin's surgery, the way she would if nothing had happened, and then her voice changed, and she finished the sentence she had left in the road back in May. She said, "When I was 19, my mother put a pen in my hand and I signed it. That's what you do." And then, after a pause, "You always did think you were the only one who ever had to." That was the end of the message. I did not call back. I did not delete it either. I saved the audio file into the same folder on my laptop where I keep the scan of the affidavit and the certified mail receipts, and a photograph of a folded pay stub, because that's where it belongs. It isn't evidence. Nothing is going to happen to anyone because of a voicemail. It's just the only time in my life my mother ever told me the truth about where all of this came from, and I wasn't going to throw that away. On a Tuesday in September, I drove Bess to school, because Marla's shift starts at 7 now and mine starts at 8. Halfway there, my niece dug a field trip permission slip out of her backpack and held it over the console and said, "Aunt Iris, can you just sign it? My mom forgot." I pulled into the drop-off lane and put the car in park. Then I handed the paper back to her and tapped it twice with my finger, on the fourth line down, where it said parent or guardian, printed and signed, with the date. She looked at it, and then at me, 9 years old and mildly annoyed, the way you look at an adult who is being weird before 8 in the morning. I told her to read it first. All of it, including the part in small print at the bottom about the bus. She sighed enormously and read it, and then she handed it back and told me the trip cost $6 and there was a box for allergies. Then I signed it, and she watched me do it, which was the point. And I said the only piece of advice I have ever given anybody that I'm sure about. Read line 4 first, even when it's me. That's my story. One question, asked out loud, in a room built so that nobody would ask it. If you have been keeping the peace for somebody who never sends you the bill until it's due, freeze your credit today and read line 4 before you initial anything. If this one landed, share it with the quiet one in your family. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.